A newspaper gave an in-depth interview to three landlords and gave them the opportunity to say what they thought of the Section 8 program, bad tenants, and the eviction process. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's something different, okay? It's an interview that this newspaper did with three landlords. And these landlords, they're in a small town in Iowa, but here's the thing, okay? What they are saying is the same message that I get from landlords throughout the entire country. When I read my comment section and, when I hear about these same exact issues happening all over the country, I know that, hey, this is a universal experience for us, okay? And, I wanted to put this story out there because there are a lot of people who watch this channel now who are tenants, and they just don't understand. They don't understand the kind of things that we go through, the reasons we raise rent, the opinions that we have of programs like Section 8, and the kind of bad tenants that we sometimes have to deal with, okay? And, they do a very, very good job here. And these landlords, I appreciate them, contributing to this article because it's not very common. Most of the time, all we hear is the tenant's perspective. And then they are left to believe that, oh, well, all landlords are bad, all landlords are evil. Well, these are dispelling the myths, okay? And, fortunately, the newspaper allowed them to respond anonymously, interviewed them anonymously. So their names weren't used and they didn't face any backlash. And that allowed them to be very open with their answers, okay? But this is the same stuff that I will tell you straight to your face. I'll say the exact same things. I don't worry about the repercussions as much as these landlords did, but I understand why they do, especially when they have to see their tenants all the time, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? What do you think of bad tenants? What do you think of the eviction process? What do you think of the Section 8 program? Put your opinions of it down in the comments below. It's kind of anonymous, you don't have to use your real name, and nobody knows who exactly you are in most situations. So, as we go through this whole thing and you hear these stories, it becomes pretty obvious that, hey, landlords are, it's not as easy as people think. They think that we're just sitting around collecting rent and not doing anything, and that's just not the case. So anyway, let's get into it. This article is coming from MississippiValleyPublishing.com, and it says, "The Rental Experience in Lee County, a Landlord's Perspective." And that's Lee County, Iowa, which is in the southeastern corner of Iowa. So I believe it's the furthest south county in Iowa. I had to look it up because I was like, I don't recognize that county. I'm from Nebraska, so I know all the counties in Iowa right next to Nebraska, but I'd never heard of that county. So anyway, let's get into the story. The article on poverty and housing examines a landlord's experience in Lee County. Several landlords in Lee County have come forward with the promise of anonymity to share their stories. All landlords cited in this article are locals who own several properties, each with over a decade of experience. As for overall experiences, I've been fairly lucky, Landlord A said. I would say that 75% of my tenants have been good. The landlord reported owning 3 properties with tenants who have rented for 6 years, while tenants occupying other properties range from 3 years to a few months. According to the landlord, unfavorable tenants are short-lived, lasting about 3 months or less. So yeah, the first landlord gets right into it, and he's like, hey, 75% of my tenants they're good. I have no problems with them. But that is a huge number of bad tenants. 25% of all your tenants are not doing well. They said that these landlords owned at least 10 properties. Or I'm sorry, did it say? Well, they own at least several properties within the county, right? And so, keeping that in mind, you have a large percentage of tenants who just aren't good. At least this landlord does, and that might be the quality of the product that he is offering. Like when you're dealing with lower income tenants, you're going to have a higher incidence of these bad tenants in there. But anyway, let's continue. According to Landlord B, the housing scarcity in Lee County is rooted in the high costs associated with construction. It is so expensive to build new rental units. You would have to charge such a high rent that nobody could afford to rent from you. That is why most rentals are the same houses or apartment buildings being sold from one investor to another. And the number of rental units doesn't really increase, they said. The upward trend in rent prices does not help. Landlord A recalled when they started leasing properties, rentals were $550 per month. Now they charge $750 per month due to increased property taxes, insurance, and other expenses. Pet deposits have also increased. Where they were once $50, they are now $200 per pet, paid up front. So basically, what he's saying here is that in this small town, and this is common in small towns throughout the entire country, right? The housing stock, they're not building new rental housing. Okay, they're not. They're not building the housing because, simply put, it costs more to build. Like, if you were to build like a new duplex, right, you would have to charge so much in rent that the people in this small town wouldn't be able to afford the rent. Okay, they wouldn't be able to afford it, and so your place would be sitting empty, or you'd have to rent it at a loss. So it doesn't make sense. So what's happening is landlords are trading the same older properties between each other, but there's no increase in the number of rental units. In fact, there's probably a decrease as, slowly over time, those buildings, they're going to get so worn out that they're just going to either, fall apart and, no longer be used as rental property, or they'll get converted for other purposes. So yeah, the rental properties are slowly disappearing, and, there isn't a great solution to this problem right now, at least, not that I've heard about. The other issue, he says, is because property taxes have gone up, because the cost of insurance has gone up, because all of his expenses increasing, that is why his rents have increased in his unit from $550 per month up to $750, a $200 increase, right? Now, that might not sound like a lot. Keep in mind that this is a small town, right? But think of it this way: in wherever you live, whatever the rents are, hey, the costs are increasing for the landlords as well in those places. Be it New York, be it San Francisco, be it Chicago, be it Omaha here where I live, okay? The costs are increasing for us, which is why we have to raise rents. And that's exactly what this landlord is saying. And it's even affecting small town landlords, okay? They're still experiencing the same issues with inflation as everyone else. Landlord C takes a meticulous approach when it comes to selecting tenants. They require prospective tenants to submit applications with references and personally contact them. If you don't leave me a landlord reference, I won't even look at the application, they said. Once a tenant is selected, Landlord C gives them a rolling month-to-month paper contract, as they find 12-month leases challenging to terminate. They also include a clause in the contract that allows them to conduct maintenance walkthroughs every 30 days. This ensures the property is well maintained and any issues can be addressed promptly. I want to make sure that the furnace, the electrical, and all the plumbing is working correctly because I've been burned before, Landlord C said. And see, D put that policy in place because he's been burned before. And I completely agree with that. You need to have the ability to go in there, check on the place, make sure the tenant isn't tearing the heck out of it. The landlords who are complacent, the ones who think, oh, everything's going well and just collect the check, they might come back and find out, hey, your property has been ripped apart. Okay, this tenant has just destroyed the place, and that's an awful thing. So after he got burned before by another tenant by being too complacent, he's like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going through this very meticulous tenant screening process to make sure. I have to make sure that I get a good tenant in there because the quality of your tenants is everything when it comes to being a landlord. And that's why, when I read about these laws where they're saying, oh, landlords shouldn't be allowed to do tenant screening, like shouldn't be allowed to look at credit checks, shouldn't be allowed to look at their background investigation, their criminal history. Well, I say, hey, you're trying to cripple us in terms of what we can do with our tenant screening. And tenant screening is everything, okay? We put a bad tenant in our property, it will cost us a fortune. It will become a losing investment. So, yeah, I mean, his experience and the experience of these other landlords, it matches what my experience is as well. Okay, landlord A does not participate in Section 8 housing due to concerns about the potential impact on their property. It usually brings the worst tenants, they said. The way I understand it, if the tenant tears up my house, the government only pays a percentage. Landlord B has only one Section 8 tenant, whom they claimed was the worst tenant they ever had. The landlord struggled to balance showing mercy to the tenants so they didn't lose their housing voucher and respecting the other tenants in the building. 8 months into the tenancy, a teenager kicked in the apartment entry door because her mother locked her out. There were multiple complaints from the other tenants in the building of the mother and daughter screaming at each other all at all hours of the night, they said. The housing authority was fine to deal with, Landlord B added, even with the inspections above and beyond the city of Fort Madison inspection. There are multiple things a tenant can do that would fall under bad tenant behavior. One of these is having too many people in the unit. Casey Barnes, in charge of Keokuk Code Enforcement and Housing, explained that mixed families make overcrowding difficult to regulate. So, yeah, the landlords, they went over their experience with the Section 8 program, and one of the landlords was just flat out, I don't want any Section 8 tenants. And, that it's completely ridiculous. It's not worth dealing with because they said that the tenant tears up the house, the government's not going to reimburse them for all of the costs involved in getting that place repaired. Okay, so that's understandable. When you're dealing with Section 8 tenants, there's a much higher probability that you're going to put a bad tenant up in the property because there are more bad tenants who are on the Section 8 program. The other landlord was like, I had a Section 8 tenant, and guess what? It was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare, and I'm not doing it again. So, like when these landlords, they have their personal experience with the program, and they have these bad experiences and they get burned, well, guess what? That makes them not want to participate, and it makes it even harder for these Section 8 tenants to find a place to live. So if the government wants people to take Section 8 vouchers, they're going to have to address the issues that landlords are bringing up. Okay? Goodness. And they can't figure it out. So I'm going to skip down just a little bit, right? And it says here, and they go into some of the stuff that bad tenants are doing, okay? It says, when tenants don't clean regularly, their home becomes a hazard for surrounding units and prime condition for pests. Tenants are responsible for taking out the trash, putting food in containers, and daily cleaning like wiping down counters and vacuuming the floor, Barnes said. If you leave your food bag out, you're asking for an infestation. You want to contain it in a sealed plastic container or steel barrel with a lid. Landlord A said they would occasionally get complaints about mice. What do you want me to do? They said. We live in Keokuk. There's a huge grain plant down the road. They come up through the sewers. So do the cockroaches. Once a month, and I tell my tenants to do the same thing. I drop bleach down my drains and toilet to keep cockroaches out. And one of the issues that a lot of landlords have is, right, you'll have tenants who are complaining about pests, and meanwhile, they are not keeping their units clean. They are, leaving trash out. Basically, they are causing the pest problem. And yet they want to blame the landlords. They want to say, hey, the landlord, they're keeping us in here and there's rats and, roaches. And meanwhile, well, you aren't throwing your trash out. You are leaving all these dirty dishes, in the sink. You are leaving food all over the cabinets. And then if we do hire an exterminator to come in there and spray, well, because you didn't clean up your mess, we don't actually, we're not able to get rid of the problem. We can't get rid of the pest until the place is cleaned. Goodness, so keep that in mind. Keep in mind that these landlords, they've experienced this stuff, and this is the same kind of stuff that all landlords throughout the entire country experience. So, let me see if I can find the part where they talk a little bit about evictions here. And it says, the process of evicting tenants can be both emotionally and financially draining for landlords. Eviction costs, including court fees and sheriff services, can add financial burdens to landlords already facing unpaid rent and damages. Eviction is a process I have only started once in my 10 years as a landlord, Landlord B said. I have worked and do work with my tenants, but this tenant was unwilling to put forth the effort to at least stay in touch. Landlord B inherited the tenant after purchasing a property. The rent was $450. The first month they paid $100 of their rent. In the second month they paid $50, Landlord B said. I saw no end in sight because every time I talked to them about a plan to stay current and pay the back balance, they wouldn't communicate with me. So when I received nothing after a 3 month grace period, I finally hung a 3 day notice. So yeah, basically this landlord saying, hey, I tried to work with the tenant. No landlord wants to go through the eviction process, despite what these tenants say. They think that, hey, oh, landlords, they love to evict. They're just greedy. They just want to get their unit back. No, we don't want to go through the eviction process. It costs us money. And you know what? I pay lawyers to handle all the stuff for me just to make sure that I don't break any laws and that the eviction goes through very quickly. But a lot of landlords are able to do this on their own, and they know the laws for wherever they live, and they just they've done the process so many times that it's easy. But small landlords in particular are more willing to work with these sort of tenants who have issues paying rent, and you know what, we give them a chance. We're not greedy. But after 3 months, what did you expect this landlord to do? You just keep taking the loss? No. So when they talk about, oh, well, you're contributing to homelessness and all that, like, listen, you know, they go into the next paragraph and they actually talk a little bit more about the finances in this situation. It says, Landlord B continued. So in the first 5 months of owning that property, I made $600, but paid $1,500 in mortgage payments, insurance, etc. And this is a perfect example of why many people wish not to be in the landlord business. So yeah, you got $600 out of this tenant, but all your payments added up to $1,500. So you're at $900 loss. So this is why a lot of small real estate investors, when they're getting started, or even people who've been own maybe one or two properties, they can get burned so quickly because that kind of thing can ruin you financially. But anyway, this is a great article. It talks a lot about the things that landlords go through, and I don't really read a lot of articles like this very often. So I'm going to put a link to the article in the description, and you can read the whole thing because it is quite interesting.